going to go ahead and get started here today, everyone. Welcome. We're going to go over the project on bacteria and viruses. Actually, a really simplistic project. In fact, one of the few that require probably the least amount of work, but really require more of an understanding of the background that the lessons support for it. So, with that, we're going to take a few minutes. I just want to go over a couple of highlights with viruses and bacteria, and then I'll talk about what the project entails, and we'll move forward from there. So, first, let's talk about some objectives from the bacteria end, then we'll talk about some of the objectives from the viral end. Okay, really, the lessons, which then kind of segue into the project, want you to be able to understand the characteristics and functions of bacterial organisms, okay? And also how bacterial organisms are transmitted in terms of disease. Now, when you compare that to viruses, really, you want to be able to understand, the complexity of viruses, being able to describe viruses, being able to compare and contrast them as they relate to bacteria, and then finally talk a little bit about the history of vaccinations and how that then relates to the prevention of outbreaks. Okay, so let's first talk a little bit about some bacterial history before we really get into viruses, because I think there's been some confusion with regards to the fact that viruses are living particles as compared to non-living particles. So when we're talking really about bacteria, okay, you have to sit there and you have to look at it from an estimate that really the average human body supports, just on our skin alone, about 1 trillion bacteria. Okay, and that may seem mind blowing and gross all at the same time, but just like every other organism on the planet, these bacteria really are competing just like every other organism for resources. Okay, so one of the things that make bacteria so successful is that their reproduction rates are astounding. Okay, these are asexually reproducing organisms, and typically they mostly reproduce by binary fission, um, whereby they can essentially reproduce themselves, make an exact clone of themselves in approximately 20 minutes. Okay, thereby doubling the population of organisms. So they reproduce very quickly, very efficiently, and that's because they're so small and simplistic. But when you talk about their roles, really they serve tons of functions. Bacteria act as decomposers, from the perspective of helping Earth's, recycling elements. They have commercial significance, okay, when we're talking about the responsibility for curing of cheeses and meats, the souring of milk. When we talk about cultured buttermilk or yogurt fermentation, these are all high volume products that are very important really in our society. Um, Bacteria are responsible for nitrogen fixation in the soil, which is increased, or which is important in terms of increasing plant productivity for farming. Okay, and you know, unfortunately, bacteria also gets a bad rap for being pathogenic. Okay, in many cases, there are pathogenic bacteria that exist outside of our bodies. Okay, and they can be, we can come in contact with those and pick up those organisms and cause contamination. Okay, and your lesson goes over tons of different, um, you know, uh, agents of contamination in respect to bacteria. Such as cholera, anthrax, botulism, whooping cough, okay, stomach ulcers. All of these are all bacterial organisms that are pathogenic, and get a bad rap because they infect humans and they cause serious disease. So I would encourage you to make sure that you definitely go back and look, into your lesson with regards to the types of bacteria that are out there, their roles and what they do. But let's move on here and take a brief overview of viruses. Okay, so really, when you go to the doctor sometimes, and the doctors nowadays are far less quick to prescribe antibiotics because we have now a better understanding of what viruses are. And really, um, viruses are essentially what we refer to as non-particulate particle matter. So they're not organisms, though they exhibit some of the traits, some of the characteristics of living things. They're not actual living organisms because they require a host. Okay, they don't respire, they don't metabolize. Really, the only two characteristics of living things that viruses have, which could make individuals question their validity as living, are the fact that they reproduce, however, be it with the help of a host cellular machinery, and they evolve, okay? And they actually evolve very, very quickly and very rapidly. And that evolution is really nothing more than a result of mutation, okay? The mutation along the DNA or the RNA that these non-particulate particles essentially mutate into. So with that, um, viruses definitely are pathogenic. We talk about immunizations. Your lesson talks a lot about immunizations. I would encourage you to read that paragraph on immunizations. But really, the highlight of that is the vaccine and how it works. Okay, vaccines using viral for viruses for vaccination are a way to introduce part of the virus, whether it be the weakened form of the virus or really an inactive part of the virus, into your skin so that your immune system can recognize that as a foreign invader and thereby then producing antibodies for the virus. Okay, so it's very important that as a civilized society, that we look at vaccinations as a means to help keep viral infections down. Okay, so that would be one thing to consider, and also the other thing to consider would be, and definitely look at, would be the immunization schedule um, that is recommended for individuals between the ages of birth and 4 to 6 years old. Okay, and that's also goes over. That's gone over in your lesson. You can see it down here. I'm going to scroll down for you. This is a really nice little schedule that talks about the different types of vaccines that are available for individuals. So I would recommend you looking at that. Okay, so now let's go over to the project and talk about that. Okay. Wrong thread here. Okay. So what is this project asking for you? Okay. The project is actually asking you to play the game. Okay. When you become sick or have a disease, how do you know if you have a bacterial or a viral infection? And many times it's the responsibility of the doctor that you go to find that out. But you can generally tell from a symptomatic standpoint whether you're infected with a virus or a bacteria. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to be able to compare and contrast the differences between bacteria and viruses, testing your knowledge below in the activity. So for this, you're going to actually complete the activity. Okay, and this is a drag and drop activity. Okay, and it's also going to then give you a count of organisms, whether they be bacteria or virus. Okay, so for this activity, once you've completed it up here in the box, you're going to get a number. For the actual answer part of this, you're going to tell me how many bacteria and viruses you produced essentially in the simulation. Okay, it's a varied number. There is no right or wrong answer. Okay, so if you get 5, that's fine. If you get 5,000, that's fine. Just make sure you include that. Okay, and then you're going to, after that, using your knowledge and what you have found from the activity, give me 5 differences between bacteria and viruses. And you can set them up in a table form, or you can just put them in a short little chart, or you can even write them in a paragraph if you want. Okay, this activity is pretty simplistic. It's pretty straightforward. If you do have problems with it, I'll certainly be in the VO to help you out this week. And we'll be back here next week going over a whole new project in microbiology. So have a good week, everyone.